Hi, I'm Bryce, and today we'll be talking about Austin Cemeteries data and how we're using AI to promote ethical stewardship for how we're managing and storing and ultimately transferring that data. So, the Austin Cemeteries data consists of about 16,000 records, primarily interments from burials in Austin's oldest public cemetery, the Oakwood Cemetery, and it goes all the way back to 1866 through 1921. And over time, it has been transcribed by different waves of people, including the Austin Genealogical Society. And there's some challenges that we're facing with the Austin Cemeteries data, namely where to host it, and especially over time, and also how the language is used. Some terms for how we refer to people and group people and places has changed over time, and we want to make sure that we're handling that with sensitivity. So, our strategy is to use the US web design system principles, and especially to be open and transparent. And that's what I'm doing today, to tell you how we're doing it, and to utilize tools and to be consistent and not uniform. And I'll show you a little bit about how that looks like in terms of the Austin Cemeteries data. So in terms of tools, we're using a lot of Python, and we're using AI to help write those Python scripts. Um, a lot of the Python scripts that we write or have AI to help us write are used to manage CSV, or comma separated values files, which is a simple file format that both humans can read and machines like it for how concise it is. And for documentation, we're making extensive use of Markdown, and that's another format like CSV that is both human readable and machine readable. It's very concise and easy to understand. It's easy to make headlines or links to things, and both CSVs and Markdown have turned out to be excellent in terms of managing and helping to explain what data is. And we are finding that AI is very adept at writing any of these Python scripts, CSV files, or Markdown documentation, or some combination of them. So in terms of long-term hosting, our immediate challenge is that the austinlibrary.com server is going the way of the dodo. So we, we have to transfer that, put it somewhere, and one way we could do it is do some kind of export from our Drupal site, but that has some complications. So we used AI to help write just a scraper Python script, and this is an example of just the prompt that I used, just very straightforward English language. And the idea is to get it out of our Drupal site, or prior to that, it was in the austinlibrary.com site, and get it into something that is more sustainable, that is not managed by me alone or even the library alone. And we are finding that GitHub Pages is an excellent place to park files, but also to make some websites to demonstrate what those files are, or to offer some context. And that has really helped to provide a tool that we can depend on, that is in wide use and is expected to stick around a lot longer than maybe even our own efforts. And this is an example of what it looked like before and what it looks like next. And sometimes the exact formatting might be changing, but we want to keep that data alive, keep it ready and accessible, but maybe put it into a place that's not under the silo or the complications that our Drupal website has. So we've, in this case, moved it from austinlibrary.com temporarily into Drupal, and then ultimately over into GitHub Pages. But beyond just moving the data and making sure it's intact, one of the big challenges with this particular set of data is making sure that we're always being sensitive with how we refer to people, and to make corrections as needed, and essentially to make sure that we are good stewards, ethical stewards of this data. And this is an example of me using the AI to write some documentation based on a Python script that it also helped me write previously. And it was basically a sophisticated search and replace that looks for cases where people have used one form of how we used to call the Austin State Hospital and just changes that to the more modern parlance. So in this case, we want to make the data available, but we also want to update it so that if people use that search term, they would find what they're looking for. And if somebody is doing historical research, they also can see where that current state of the database came from. So I'm using AI to write the script to help prepare the CSV, but I'm also using that script to prepare the documentation that explains what that CSV is and what the Python script is and how they work together to get us to the present day. And then I'm saving that file over on GitHub. So that's what has been happening over on the left if you've been watching over there. So that's an example of what a CSV looks like. It's very simple, just with some column headings separated by commas. And here is an example of what the markdown format looks like. And again, it's very basic. There's just a number sign to indicate a headline, for example. And next, I'll just show you briefly what that Python script looks like. Now, recall, I'm not a Python expert. I just know enough to know that it's useful. So in this case, I'm having AI help me, but it didn't get there on the first iteration. And in some subsequent demos, I'll show you that sometimes there's a little bit of a back and forth. But it looks really sophisticated and technical, but we always want to make sure that we're adhering to these core principles of the US web design system, for example, to make sure that we're not getting lost in the code or just making that we're losing sight of what we're ultimately trying to do. So here's another demo. In this case, I'm having it write a script that will do some manipulation of a CSV that I needed it to do. But as it turns out, the first version of that script that it generated had some issues, so I'm sending it back to the drawing board, and it's writing it in real time very quickly. And as I mentioned earlier, way quicker than I could have ever done it. I couldn't have done it, but I know enough to help it get it started. And I've indicated that the PK Oakwood is a primary key, for example. In this case, it's making more dynamically understanding the CSV that I'm throwing at it. But I noticed that it might actually make some duplications because it was a little bit brutish in how it was handling the CSV. So I'm asking, will it actually skip the main CSV file? And lo and behold, no, it won't. But it can, so it now edited itself and made a better version of that script and explained how it works and how to use it. So in some cases, I might just copy that documentation and save it somewhere. And in some cases, I just might follow that documentation. And in some cases, I may apply that script and make sure it does what it says it was, advertised to do, and nothing more and nothing less. But my point is that you do have to do some iteration and trial and error, and also that you don't depend on the AI to come up with the answer right away. And when you have the chance, such as myself, or if you have the chance to do an interview with an archivist, and which I did previously, you're gaining clues that then you can feed into the AI, but it's not that you're letting it take over the wheel. You're still driving, but you're having some assistance. So it's not like it's full auto driving that it's going to just, you take a nap and you just show up from Los Angeles to New York City. And in this case, I'm showing another example of how I previously had the AI write a script, and now I want the AI to write some documentation about what that script is. So in both cases, those are text formats, and the current generation of AI, the large language models, are very good at writing text, and especially structured text, such as Python, CSV, or Markdown files. And I'm just showing what that looks like in real time. And in this case, I was still at the point where we were using the Drupal version, the temporary way station of that data. And I had created some feeds importers, and I just needed it to write some documentation to remind myself or others how that works. Now, subsequently, we've moved on. We are not fully relying on that, although it is still helpful in some cases. But this is an example where it was useful for that moment, and I did use it, but it also might be useful subsequently to just show how that function works if I needed to do a different type of Drupal feeds importing. So, but what we're doing is going back and forth, and when you get something that's worth saving, then you're saving it over in GitHub. And sometimes the documentation is valuable in real time right then, and sometimes it's worth saving. But we want to make sure that we're keeping the US web design system's advice for keeping the user in the primary focus and making sure that we're meeting user needs and not getting, as I've mentioned earlier, lost in the specifics of the code or getting just too bogged down with the nitties and gritties. Now, of course, those are important, and you do need to verify data and verify code. But what this AI is making possible is for me to work much faster and to have an agent doing some of the so-called grunt work for me, which makes me able to go through much faster iterations and also to leave some breadcrumbs for people in the future. So we're advancing UX, we're promoting ethical stewardship along the way, and ideally we are making possible future research and development that also keeps in current context the important sensitivity or the inclusive tone or the archival language is taken into account. So if you are doing something similar, I hope that this is something that has inspired you with some ideas for how you might apply it for your own systems. And we should all take a lesson from the US web design system and from the Austin cemeteries and the people who lived and made possible that data and treat them with respect and with the stewardship of ethics that they deserve. So next, I'll open the window for questions, and I'm also available in the Slack channel or subsequently by email, and I'd love to keep the dialogue going. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to keeping... I'll stop now. Thank you. Bye.